Hi, everybody. Ooh, hello, the voice of God. Mike Butcher here, journalist, tech journalist extraordinaire, of course. And it's a delight to be here. Yes, as Connie was saying, this is TechCrunch's sort of boutique brand, a much more intimate atmosphere. Now, normally, you'd see Connie in front of about 3,000 people at TechCrunch Disrupt, amidst about 10,000. And so it's quite a rare occurrence to have such an intimate atmosphere at a TechCrunch event. So it's a delight to see you all. We're going to be talking a bit about building. We titled this a very grand title: "Building Resilient Tech Ecosystems, Investing in Cybersecurity, AI, and Deep Tech." And we couldn't think of a better person to cover this subject than Nazo from Paladin, who you joined last year, I think, didn't you?
It's on the job.
Exactly, but Paladin has a long history. But first of all, perhaps we could hear from you a little bit about you, because you have quite a storied history in venture capital. I gather you were at the Carlyle Group some time ago, and you founded Europe's first dedicated cybersecurity fund. But perhaps you could unpack a little bit your story in the venture space.
Sure. Great to be here. Great to see these faces. So I've been in London since 2000. Before that, I was in the US. I thought I was become a technology CEO, an entrepreneur. That's what I was gunning for. And I ran into a venture capital course in the business school, and I fell in love. And I've been doing that ever since, and I think that was 1999.
Just hold your mic a little closer.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Is that better? Okay. And so I've been investing in venture. I came to Europe when the technology markets crashed in 2000, so I've been at this for a very long time. I came to London for a 2-year stint. I was sure I was going to go back to the US after that. I hated my first year here, miserable gray weather.
Most people do.
Yeah. And, you know, I can't go back. Love it here now. And so I came over here with the Carlyle Group. They launched their first European tech fund. And as you know, in venture capital and private equity, they say really your launch year is really your destiny. And 2000 was one of the worst performing years in technology. So, you know, I helped launch one of those funds.
Was there a moment when, especially during that crash, and I remember it as well, that you thought, okay, we're going to pivot into something else?
Yeah, back then, if you remember, there was the B2C and B2B. Do you remember that? Back to banking and back. I guess
the dot-com boom was very B2C, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Well, back to banking.
Well,
yeah,
we were an internet fund, and you know, it was just one of the worst years. And at that time, you know, there's a lot of complaints about venture capital in Europe when you compare it to the US. But for those of us who have been here a while, you really compare it to the last 10, 20 years, and oh my God, you know, we really have a business today. So just the market has really evolved so much. You know, so many of the US venture capital funds are here, in particular in London. And so to continue with that story very quickly, essentially I spent 3 funds, 12 years at Carlyle. Carlyle then IPO'd, and I thought, okay, this is getting a little bit too far away from the entrepreneur, and that was the bit that I really enjoyed doing. It's getting a little bit too, you know, kind of Excel-y and not enough of that face time with the entrepreneur. And so I thought, if you're not going to be big and global, what are you going to do? You're going to be smaller and specialist, and where do you need specialism is in that kind of deeper tech. And I don't know why I thought I knew why I thought cybersecurity was the thing to do, because, you know, it evolves so much, and you really need to know you need to be an expert in it. But I don't know why I thought I could be that expert, but I did. And so I launched with another partner what became Europe's first cybersecurity fund. And I've been doing cybersecurity in essentially, which is Paladin's strategy, everything that sits underneath the application stack. You know, if you think of most venture funds, they tend to invest in the stack itself, SaaS, vertical SaaS, etc. And we try to invest in all the things that make your software stack go, short of going into the hardware. That's a different world.
I see, right. So, but obviously plenty of experience in the industry. but the focus for Paladin is multi-stage, cybersecurity, a whole bunch of things, isn't it? What would you say it would be the overall theme?
So in terms of strategy, we do try to come in earlier. We think that is really where the value is, and especially since, the folks at Paladin, I can't say we, I've only been there 6 months, but the folks at Paladin have been really doing this one thing for the last 20 years. We've gone through now we're on our 4th fund, one of the things that allows you to do is to really become an expert in that subject matter. So we come in quite early. We've come in with the proverbial 2 guys in the business plan, but typically we are the first institutional capital, and then we follow that money all the way through. We've got investments from, kind of pre-product all the way through to, 125 million plus in revenue. So that's a little bit in terms of stage. In terms of sector, as I mentioned, it's really anything under the application stack, quite a bit of cybersecurity, a big dollop of cybersecurity. In fact, Mike, I think last week you were interviewing one of my CEOs in Athens, Harry.
Right, yeah, Hack the Box.
Yes, yeah. That's right. So he was one of those companies. They do red and blue teams, basically, if you're familiar with that terminology. He had developed, now today, a 3 million community, and one of the very few successful PLG motions, product-led growth motions. He now has a thriving business in the enterprise sector. And now coming back to your theme of defense and dual use, one of the things that we did, along with Carlyle, which has come into that investment with us, was really to help him diversify into the government sector. And so today, he's got his wonderful kind of community, he's got an enterprise business, and he's got a separate government business.
Yeah, I mean, Hack the Box is quite a successful company. Now, what I wanted to get to now really is your thoughts on Europe. We've seen European defense spending going up for obvious reasons due to Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. There's the big issue here, because obviously everybody's talking about a combination of defense, security, infrastructure, resilience. Resilience is a big word that I hear a lot in these days. And what I want to know from you is how startups can compete in that kind of space that has traditionally, both obviously there's security for government services, which would be considered to be civilian, but these days, because of state actors, it's all sort of wrapped up with hybrid warfare. But what you would consider, how do startups compete or work in this world when it's been so dominated for so many years by these big prime contractors in the US, the big names like Lockheed Martin, etc., in the UK, Thales, etc., in the Dassault Systems in France. So where do you see it fitting, and how do you see it ramping up and speeding up? Because let's talk about this, is a very traditional industry.
It is. And, I kind of compared a little bit to, there was a lot of investment. I mean, so much money is going into the sector, right? I think last year it was the fastest growing segment of venture capital. Understandably, defense budgets are going up by 10, 12%. I was just at a London Stock Exchange event where the Secretary of Defense was speaking. So there's a reason. Part of it is just a lot of investment, but I think that's not the only reason that there's so much money going into the sector. Ukraine really showed that defense departments need to change. They cannot have 10-year procurement cycles, because in Ukraine, innovation happens within weeks, right? And so defense departments have to change. They don't have a choice.
Do they know it?
I think they do. Whether they know how to change it is a different thing. What I heard today here, and it certainly is, repeating quite a bit of what we hear from the U.S. administration, is just much easier procurement. To your question about how does an SMB get into the sector, I think this particular government has made a promise to essentially take the very large defense prime type of contracts down from, I think it's 6 years down to 2, and the more off-the-shelf software down to 3 months, right? Now that starts to look more like an enterprise enterprise motion and time frame than in defense, where the value of death is really, quite torturous. So I think those are some of the things. The other thing that's happening because of Ukraine is we're starting to see real. If you remember, a few years ago, we saw B2C enter B2B, right? We had things like Slack and so on. I think B2B is now entering into B2G. And you're starting to see real commercial, that whole commercial stack coming into, so you don't need to develop.
G being government?
Government, sorry.
Right.
Yes, government. So you don't need to develop very bespoke specialist products just for the government sector. The government is starting to come towards the SMBs. Now, I'm making it sound like it's already happened. It hasn't happened, but we're seeing more and more of that.
You're seeing that in some of that in the US. What are you seeing in European governments?
These pronouncements were in the UK, and I think the UK certainly is following in close footsteps, including finding ways to procure software. I think that's one of the challenges, right? Because many of us are software entrepreneurs, and procurement within government is usually with big systems and hardware, and so finding ways for defense sector to buy software is a really important piece of it. So I think we are seeing that. Now, having said that, my guess is, just like a lot of VCs found it very difficult to invest in the energy sector, because you come in as a software investor and you think, I'm going to find all these great data and software companies, and I'm going to find these, buyers who are going to lean into technology. That wasn't the case, right? And I think it's going to be very similar in defense. So there's a lot of money coming in, but unless you know how to get access.
How to navigate.
You got it.
Is there a second layer between the defense, dual use, the government, and smaller companies? So, for instance, a smaller startup supplying or being a stack available to a company which is interfacing with the defense sector. There must be plenty of opportunity for that. And is that a way into the ecosystem in some way?
Well, there's certainly channel partners that get you into defense, right?
Right.
So Harry, for example, a lot of his business is direct, and some of that is really about making sure you have people who can maneuver you through that. One of the things we've done at Paladin is, if you look at our website, you'll see like the great and good of advisors. Now, these people are actually folks that are in every weekly meeting with us. They're not just, names out there, but they're part of the deal teams, because we really find them necessary to help, especially if you're, an enterprise software company, to really help you understand how to sell into the defense sector. So part of it is, I think you do need to have an investor, hopefully, or somebody around the table who's a mentor, somebody who's guiding you through that. There are channel partners that go, specifically to defense. I don't mean the primes. I mean really like the Accentures of the world, if you will. So there's certainly those types of folks, but government does need to dip in. And I think, again, the UK now has promised that they will spend 10% of their budget on new innovations. The last thing I will say is, in the US, and I think, again, the UK is trying to replicate some of this, there's a department that really just looks at innovation, right? So they're very separate from the overall defense, and they really look at new innovative technologies and how to procure that and bring that into the department. So those are the groups you've got to go into.
Right. Well, I mean, the elephant in the room, of course, is that we've seen so much change geopolitically over the last few months. And there is obviously concern, there's quite an obvious concern that's happened recently. I mean, we saw Canada talk about possibly cancelling its F-35 contracts or looking at it again. We've seen European governments concerned about what would happen if they continue to use US systems. We've seen Gripen in Sweden suddenly start to get orders on their books for their fighter jet, which is obviously made in Europe. Do you see, from the sort of an investor level, do you see any sort of US-Europe decoupling on some of the investing thesis that's been happening over the last few years? For many years, of course, we were all thinking in terms of NATO and cybersecurity and defense intelligence, and now there is a clear geopolitical decoupling, or certainly non-alignment, less aligned than it used to be. How is that going to play out in venture, do you think?
Yeah, so I think, this is sort of entered...
Or will it play out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crystal ball, right? So I think there's a belief that this has all happened very recently, right? And in fact, some people will say the J.D. Vance speech at the Munich Security Conference, when you can just take a look at every single European defense stock, and there's a J-curve, right? It just like shoots up, and that was the J.D. Vance event, where the U.S. did say, look, we need to, you need to become more independent in terms of your own budgets and procurement, et cetera, right? And yet, if you take a look at European defense budgets, for the last 12 years, they've been increasing, except for 1 year, I think they've been increasing. And it goes back to even the first Trump administration, where I think people read the tea leaves right, and they started to really invest in behind European defense. So that's a little bit the kind of history leading up to it. I think decoupling is the wrong word, right? I mean, in so many ways, whether you're talking about defense, security, technology. Well, first of all, we all want to build large global businesses. So it would be really a shame if this, kind of hard wall came down between these geographies, right? We have more in common than we have differences, and we here, I think, all want to build large international businesses. So I think that's just, I'm saying the obvious. That said, will Europeans try to procure more on a European basis, and how far will that go? Will the UK buy more UK? We'll see. I think whatever happens, we have to realize that, half of international trade still happens in dollars. Our entire tech infrastructure, whether it's the cloud or large language models, it's all in the US, right? And 75% of US defense spending goes to US companies, right? So that decoupling is not going to happen overnight. And to quote Merz, step by step. If it does happen, it's going to happen step by step.
Chancellor Merz.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, yes,
so he
absolutely.
said that. Step by step.
Step by step.
Right.
Step by step.
Sounds like a song.
You start.
I see. So that is going to happen, or it's going to take a very long time?
I think it's going to take a very long time.
And it may never happen at all.
Even today, when I was listening, I think, it will bring possibly the UK closer to Europe, right, in terms of its procurement and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, if you think about it, let's look at cyber for a moment. Like, your adversary doesn't really care whether you've got a Labour government or a Conservative government. They don't really care if they just want to get at the goods, right? They just want to get at the assets. So I think at the end of the day, we've just got to continue to build these businesses, and hopefully the politics will continue to be internationalist enough that we can continue to build these large international businesses.
Right. Presumably, they'll continue to be built just not in China. Obviously.
Yeah, quite obviously, yes. And a couple of other countries.
And a few others that we're familiar with. Yeah. Obviously, we can't do a tech event these days without talking about AI, which is obviously now the layer over which everything happens. In your context, what does it mean in the way that you think about investment, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, let me maybe just give one example of another company in our portfolio and why that dual use is really important, and it's an AI company. So 5 years ago, in AI kind of time frame, it's like prehistory, right? When no one was thinking really, we talked to so many commercial CISOs, and they were not thinking about the protection of AI, right? They were thinking, well, we don't even have AI systems out there. Because 2 years later, that's when ChatGPT entered the public consciousness, and that's when today, of course, Gartner says it's the top priority for every CISO. We thought this was an important theme, and so we began to talk to CISOs. As we said, we didn't see any revenue coming. Began to talk to the US government, who's spending billions on AI, and was very concerned about what happens when these systems are out in the wild, and how do you protect these systems. So the company is called Calypso AI, and it lived in the first couple of years. I'm overstating it a little bit, but the first 2 years, it was really, where it got its revenues, where it got a lot of its non-dilutive financing, was from government. Today, of course, it's got lots of nice commercial customers, and lots of people are interested. So there are times when the technology is very early stage. Some of it may actually come from government. We forget that, radar, GPS, all of this is technologies that come from government, and in particular from defense. But there are times when companies need that sort of financing, right? To answer your question more directly, though, when you look at cybersecurity, it's a little bit like gaming, right? It's one of those sectors that adopts technologies very early on. So AI and cybersecurity has been there for years, and it's hard to say how you're going to fundamentally differentiate.
But obviously, generative AI.
Yes.
was a step change.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So in terms of how we look at AI, we first of all look at everything that's underneath the application layer, and we see these big platform innovations that happen. Cloud was one of them, right? And so that created a whole set of opportunities, and you needed an entire new infrastructure for that. AI we see as another very important step, and the same tools you used before to protect your organization are very different. So we see really AI as another very large, innovative platform on which we can innovate, and so that's what we look at. Now, you're absolutely right. Now, all AI is turned agentic, right? I have to tell you, I don't see, we talk to CISOs all the time, CIOs all the time, CTOs. We're not seeing a lot of companies just ready to let hundreds of agents just run wild across the organization. And I think a few things need to be in place before that happens. Right. You need, at least, first of all, the workflows, right? Just like content was for generative, you need the workflows for agentic.
So, yeah, and obviously there's going to be all sorts of cyber security implications as well.
Absolutely.
Just in the final moments, I really wanted to ask you that another thing that's happened, obviously geopolitically, is that we've heard about the end of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. We've heard, and we've also shifted in this way to defense and security and resilience, and the world is getting closer to midnight, as it were, to some extent, isn't it? But what do you think about in this context? Because, is it a case where we can sweep that away and just go forward, or is it a case that we'll continue to need diversity of voices?
Look, when I entered Carlyle, I think I was the first woman I was the first woman at the tech fund. There was one woman in the buyout team. I recently met a woman, she said she was employee number 4, the 4th woman, 15 years later. So I would say, you probably do need some programs still. I don't think we're in a post-gender, post-ethnic world. I wish we were. I don't think we are. That said, I think where people got fed up with DEI is when they saw unfairness. So, for example, in the UK, white children of disadvantaged backgrounds have much worse outcomes than Indian, Pakistani, etc. And when a Pakistani, an Afghan, myself, when we get a privilege, that's when I think things go badly, right? So I think we need to, first of all, be very wide in terms of our definition and be truly inclusive when we talk about DEI. And I think certainly in Europe, I don't see that going away.
Right. And
last words?
Is that going to be... No, but I mean, I know that you're involved in NATO, Diana, which is obviously continuing to push for ethical, democratic aligned funding. But how do you see all that being sort of wrapped up?
Tell me more about that. What do you mean? How do I see how does NATO?
I guess I think you've answered the question, to be honest with you. But what I was just going to say was that it's not a world of machismo defense tech from here on.
Oh, I see. Look, no, and certainly in a lot of what we do, if you look around this room, would you like to see more, just gender? Of course you do. But it's a very complex thing, and you've got to start very, very early on, right? And part of defense is just we have to make sure that defense is actually, if we really have certain beliefs, we have to defend it, and we have to not make it this other sector that men enter into and women don't, right? So I think we just have to bring it into the mainstream. I think that's the answer.
At the end, we are fighting for certain principles, are we not? Well, Nazo Moosa from Paladin Capital, thank you very much for coming to Strictly VC. Thank you.